Welcome to Reefing Radio, your go-to salty station for reef aquarium talk, tips and interviews. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to Reefing Radio. My name is Chris, and as always, I'm joined by Gareth and James. And in this episode, we're going to be continuing our discussion about stability because last week we frankly ran out of time. We didn't realize how much we had to say on the topic, and also Gareth's computer was malfunctioning. So before we jump into the main topic, how is everyone doing? Anything exciting going on in your reefing worlds?
I can update you this week to start off with. Just a quick one. It's back to Pectinia land again. I'm enjoying my Pectinia. Keep Pectinia chatting, but I got a slightly receding. I think there's quite a few been shipped into the country recently, and that's been my little pet project this week. I've never done it before, but really focusing on feeding it. So I fed it pretty much every day. Been feeding it Gunny Power, and it's amazing to watch. It doesn't put anything out like tentacles or anything, but this mucus that is clearly on it all the time, just all of a sudden, it's gone inside the mouths. And within, I think I'm on day 8 now. I'm seeing the flesh is starting to grow over the exposed bits, and it's starting to really puff up. It's the most puffy coral I've got in the tank at the moment, so I'm starting to be swayed by the idea of feeding my corals. So it's fun little journey. So I'll keep on with that and see how puffy and fast I can get it to grow.
So they have tentacles, right? But they're not feeder tentacles.
Yeah, so they got pretty long sweeper tentacles. It's funny. It's one of those corals where it's got a few sweeper tentacles, and you go down at night and they're halfway across your tank kind of thing. But there's no tentacles to eat with. It's literally its mouth opens up, and all the mucus that, as I say, you can't actually see this mucus on it, just starts disappearing into the mouth, and it's so puffy. So an interesting feeding response. Not quite what I expected, but very satisfying to watch. And that takes 2 minutes, 3 minutes to eat it all, and then it's happy, puffed up, and ready to roll.
What are you feeding it?
So I'm feeding it Gunny Power, and I'll be honest, I can't remember why I'm feeding it Gunny Power. I think it was recommended. I've probably seen it or heard it on a podcast or something like that. Just use it. I'm sure all these powdered foods are much of a muchness, but it gets a really good response. So I'll keep using that for now. And
what is Gunny Power, Gareth? Is it an amino acid or?
So I think it's a powdered food, much like Reefroids in terms of what's in it. I don't really know, but it's not a liquid food or anything like that. It's a powder. So I usually mix it up in some water, get a kid's Calpol syringe, and then just gently baste it, and it seems to do the job.
It's from Julian Sprung, right? It's one of his.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I've not tried that. I feed Benepets. That seems to be like a really popular one at the moment.
I've used Benepets and really liked it as well. I use Reefroids as the other one.
They say that if your phosphates are low, use Reefroids, and otherwise you can use Benepets because it supposedly doesn't. If anything, it's meant to actually lower nutrients, but because it's got all these probiotics in it. But who knows? I haven't seen it actually impact nutrients, but then I don't feed it enough. They were saying, I saw a post on their Instagram the other day that they were saying people are actually underfeeding it most of the time, and they were saying really you need to be using quite big scoops of it. But I wondered if that was also a marketing ploy. But to be fair, I have seen some of the big, I think TSA or I don't know, one of the big coral farms in the US, they basically said when the nutrients are good, they feed Benepets because it doesn't seem to impact their nutrients at all. And then when they're low, they use Reefroids. Yeah, for me, reefing the last couple of weeks has been pretty quiet. So I've been focusing a lot on other things. With summer, it's always the tanks kind of always go on the back burner a bit. But really hoping this week to try and make some inroads on the tank behind me. So the SPS cube really needs some maintenance. And something I've been doing this week, I've been finding myself watching scuba diving videos of people on coral reefs. I was trying to get some inspiration on how to try and make this tank behind me. I really want it to look as natural as possible. So I've gone for really white light. I don't care at all about fluorescence on these corals. I want it to look as much as possible like coral in the ocean. So majority of them look kind of brown, to be honest, which is fine. And I've been trying to think, how can I take a bit more of a freshwater approach and actually really try and recreate something that looks more natural? And what I want to do is and I want your advice on this, is to take out the substrate, which I've currently got in there, because it's crushed aragonite, and it is nice, it's fine, but it's so uniform and it's so sterile looking that it kind of makes it look unnatural to me. And then secondarily, it keeps getting blown around in the flow. And so what I was thinking to do, I was noticed when I was watching these videos, for the substrate on these reefs is actually mostly broken up bits of coral, quite big chunks with kind of silt and stuff in between. And what I was wanting to do was to buy calcium media reactor stuff, which is basically crushed coral, an inch or so long, use that as kind of the foundation for the substrate, and then use Carib Sea Ocean Direct sand, which I used on my previous tank. And that's literally just sand that they've scooped up in a bucket from the reef and put in a bag. And so it has, in theory, it has all of this. And actually, not even in theory, BRS tested it. They did a microbiome test, and it has really good microbiome. And it links to our topic of stability this week, and our continuing conversation on stability. It has a really good microbiome. And so what I was thinking was to use that, the combination of those two, to try and create something a bit more natural, because that sand, it has all the way from dust up to massive pieces of shell in it. So it has that much more natural aesthetic. And it really did look good in my old tank. And I was wondering whether the combination of those two would solve potentially the issue of sand blowing around if you've got this kind of more of a skeleton structure to hold pockets of sand together. And it might also help improve the biodiversity, because this tank just seems to be stuck in a cycle of it looking quite good, corals starting to grow, and then get dinoflagellates or just brown crap basically on all the glass in the tank. And so I've got these bits, I've already ordered it, so if you tell me it's a terrible idea, I'm still going to do it. But I'm just curious to hear what your thoughts are on that approach.
Well, I've got a couple. First one is, I've got a bucket full of skeletons from my tank crash. Chris, if you want to smash them up with a hammer and put them in, be my guest.
Oh, it would have saved me. Yeah, it would have saved me some money.
It didn't save me some money. That bucket, I think, cost me about 800 quid.
Oof, probably more if you
yeah.
maybe added it up.
Anyway, but yeah, so I removed my sand bed in the 4-foot. I don't know if you recall. So I took some learning from that. It is a pain, I'm not going to lie. The best thing, I tried all sorts of things, different hoses with different gauges. I tried a wet dry vacuum cleaner. And actually what I found was, I'll measure it, but I think it's about an inch gauge, quite large. And the best thing to do was just create a siphon and, suck the sand out in a very methodical way, working from right to left, until you patches of emptiness. You will empty your tank of water with the size of the tank. Even in my 4-foot, I had to do it in stages. And so you'll need a lot of pre-made water, and potentially, and it'll need to be heated to the right temperature, try and match your parameters as much as you possibly can, so you don't get massive tickly because you've got some.
That's a good point. I need to make some more salt water, actually. I'm running low. Yeah, that's a good point. And
do it in stages, maybe over the course of a week or so, because you're going to...
I don't have time for that. I'm just going to do it in one day. It's really not that... It's really not that much sand. And I don't want to remove it all because I don't care if some of it remains. The idea is just to replace the majority, get 80% of it out, and then fill the rest back up with this new stuff. But practicalities aside, do you think... am I mad to think that it will hold the sand together more? Because what I'm finding is that it basically in the corners where the pumps converge, I'm keep getting patches of bare tank basically being exposed. And so I was kind of thinking that the skeletons might give it a bit more structure. I don't know whether it will work or not.
I can put in on this one. So in terms of my tank, it's a 4-foot peninsula, and I'm reluctant to have power heads anywhere but on either side of the way, so I'm pushing water pretty hard all the way around, clockwise for 2 hours, all the way around for 2 hours. So I definitely get those ball patches, particularly about maybe a foot from the power heads. And so I did exactly what you say. I smashed up a load of rocks, put it into the areas where I get the worst movement, poured sand back in, and it definitely holds it there better. It's thinner, it's noticeably thinner, the sand there. And what you do get is the rock itself gets a lot of coralline on it, which that could be the look you want, but it's not a white sand. It's very much it's almost like the rocks are coming out of the bottom of the tank, which is quite nice, quite natural, because in reality there will be rocks under the sand in the sea. So it has that kind of look of rocks poking out, but just covered by sand. But yeah, it definitely works. So yeah, I'd rate it if that's what you're aiming for. It'll stop the sand moving, but it definitely changes the look.
Yeah. I'm worried it would look messy. But then I think that's sort of also the point. That's what annoys me about it at the moment, is that it's so, as I said, it's so uniform that it looks almost gravel in a goldfish tank. I don't know how else to describe it. It just has that such a uniformity that to me it looks unnatural. And yeah, I used to be very much into the freshwater world, and there I learned that it's those tiny details. It can be the right tiny little pebble in the right place, or it's that last scattering of tiny little rocks that brings it to life. And I wondered whether, can I do something like that here? And then the other benefit is that I'm adding in ocean bacteria, and I'm hoping that would maybe help a little bit with this kind of just cycle of brown crap that keeps building up in the aquarium.
I think the other thing that you'll find as well, Chris, is that, obviously the larger pieces will grow algae and coralline on it, and it's whether that's going to do your head in, because by its very nature, it's going to be large enough to be able to host those types of things, but also by its very nature, you're going to be steering the flow away from it. So you're going to have a low flow environment with a surface that likes to grow algae.
That does concern me. I don't mind coralline so much because, looking at these videos of people scuba diving, the substrate is really messy. There is algae, there's silt and detritus everywhere, and there is coralline and stuff. And I even thought about actually putting in a couple of macroalgae and stuff as well. We were talking about this today, looking at mussels and clams online and stuff. Like, what little extra details and stuff could I put in to kind of just make it look a bit more natural? Anyway, that's what I'm going to do. And if it's disastrous, I can just take it all out again and put in regular sand. I suppose it shouldn't be too much of an issue. But I remember, what's the BRS guy called, Ryan? Is it Ryan Batchelor? He was having this kind of stuck in this ugly phase, and he had a bare bottom tank, but he poured in bags of that ocean direct sand, and he was like, overnight, all the uglies were gone. And he put that down to like the addition of this kind of extra bacteria. So let's see whether that helps or not. The other thing I've done with that tank is add a yellow Fiji leather. So this is a coral which I've wanted to keep for a really long time. I think this is the perfect tank for it because people, I think they hear leather coral, softy, whatever, and think it needs to go into a low flow, low light environment. But when you look at these coral in the wild, they're basically the acropora of the soft coral realm. So they grow on acropora. So actually, when you get them come in, they're often growing on pieces of SPS. And they really sit in that crash zone. So that's why they don't really have a stalk. They're more plated in a way. So I've tried them before, and I put it into a softy tank and it rotted away. So I'm really hoping that in this tank it will do well because lots of flow. It's getting about 300 par, and you can actually see the yellow as well because it's in a really white lit tank. So I'm really excited to try that coral. Hopefully it works out. Anything else that you guys wanted to talk about before we jump into the main topic?
I mean, I've not touched the tank. I've been on holiday for the last 2 weeks and trialed my big ice cubes made out of the reef soup you all looked at when we were doing the last episode. I can't quite see into the tank because I haven't scraped the glass yet either, but I'm not sure how the MPS is faring. I spoke about this last time round, that was starting to look a bit sad. I don't think that the 2 weeks absence has done it any favours, but I'm probably in a better position to give you all an update when the next episode is on.
How much do you worry about your tanks when you go on holiday?
I have a webcam on it, so I can see in. I've got the apex now, so I can get some more parameters, and I have a daily check-in from whoever's looking after the tank. I've got a few people that are really trusted now, to the point where I was away on holiday earlier this year, and we had a planned power cut. So that was a definite 8-hour power cut, and I had them all ready to switch on the generator. And it's that kind of level of understanding that they will do what I need them to do, and they'll call when they're stuck. So for me, it's a proper worry, but I've got redundancies in place to cover all that.
I don't think I've had a holiday where I've come back and the tank's been looking better. I worry to some degree, But I think that's it, isn't it? It's like if you're going on one summer holiday, then you can probably keep most things and make sure it can tick over during that period. But it's I think you've got to if you want to minimize those issues, then you've got to stock accordingly based on how often you can be there. I try and simplify it as much as I can for the tank sitters, and make sure that all the food's all laid out for them in the freezer in pots with days if necessary, so that they know which one to feed and when, and try and simplify it. So I don't think it's necessarily anything that anyone's doing, to harm the tank or to disrupt it in any way. I just think you don't realize that when you're around during the week how much you do, in terms of maintenance and focus on it, even if it's just walking past the tank and seeing that a coral's fallen off the rocks and correcting it. If that happens when you don't do it for 2 weeks, it then gets buried by your cucumber or your sand sifting goby, and then you come back and it's partially stripped because it's been buried. It's just little things like that happen that you can't control when you're not there.
Let's move on to the main topic of discussion then, which is stability part 2, essentially. So in the last session, we talked about microbiome and stability and kind of debate around bacterial diversity, whether bottled bacteria are actually good or not, whether we can really do anything about our microbiomes. There was some discussion of testing versus observation, and also what the key parameters really are. And I think, James, you argued for stability above everything else, and salinity. Sorry, yeah. Otherwise, we sort of agreed that we preferred kind of focusing on ranges rather than kind of fixed targets, I think. So maybe to continue then, we talked a lot about alkalinity, pH, salinity. What about magnesium and calcium? What are your thoughts on those two? How much do you care about calcium and magnesium?
Yeah, that's an interesting one for me. I've always wondered how much everyone else's tanks does the same kind of thing. Everyone's tank's unique in how it takes up calcium, magnesium, etc. But I use a 3-part system. So I dose calcium, alkalinity, and then magnesium. But I say I dose it. I've had this system running now for about 2 years. It's about the 2-year anniversary. So I buy bulk ingredients. I make it all up myself. And I bought all the 3 main ingredients to make them. I've never yet made up a batch of magnesium because my magnesium never changes. So that's a year on this tank and a year in a different tank. And I know there'll be some kind of crossover between the bacteria and the corals and things like that. But fundamentally, it's a different tank. And I haven't dosed magnesium in all my reefing time so far. So I don't know where or what magnesium goes in my tank, but it doesn't. Like I say, I test it. I even got to the point where I was getting new test kits just because I wasn't convinced it was right, and I still get no magnesium uptake. So for me, I'm kind of like, who cares? Does it matter? Doesn't seem to in my tank. So I'm interested if you two have got a different view on that. But yeah, it does nothing in my tank.
Yeah, definitely my tanks consume magnesium. If I have had it go too low, for example, and I've had to dose it back up, and I use a 2-part that has the calcium and magnesium in one, right? So it's constantly being dosed in. Where is your magnesium going? Well, you're not dosing any, right? So where's mine going, I guess, is the bigger question. But because it must be being consumed, it's not going up. I remember there's a really good series of videos from Tidal Gardens where Fan explains in huge amounts of detail the chemistry that or the important chemical role that magnesium plays. It's not necessarily so important for the coral, but it's more important for maintaining the stability of the other elements. So if you didn't have magnesium there as kind of a buffer, calcium and alkalinity would just combine in the water.
It does make me think that, if I remember right, magnesium is aragonite and calcium is calcite. So that's what makes up your sands. So I do wonder if all the aragonite in my sand is breaking down to release it. So rather than my magnesium's going somewhere, I wonder whether it's coming from the rocks and things, which, if that's the case, at some point it'll run out. But you'd have expected by a year by now it'd have run out or been depleting. But yeah, still no change in my magnesium. But it's an interesting one, isn't it?
My view's always been around magnesium that if it's within a acceptable parameter range, sort of 1200 to 1400 there or thereabouts, then it's absolutely fine. And it's more for the balance and stability of the other elements within the tank as much as anything. I think that high magnesium can cause problems, right? It can be harmful to inverts and corals. And I think, as with anything, rapidly changing levels within the water column can also, shock things and cause some issues too.
I've heard of people whose magnesium is low, and the amount they have to dose to bring it back up is insane. They're pouring liters and liters of the stuff in. Just again, like, where is it going? Is it, maybe there are these, I hadn't really thought about that before, but maybe there are these non-biological sinks like your sand bed or the rocks or something that maybe are binding it. I don't know.
I had an issue with magnesium, low magnesium actually, and I bought bulk solutions and made my own. Right, it was liters of fully concentrated buffer that I'd made over a period of time to get it to come back. But I also read that if you've got high manganese, I think magnesium can precipitate out. So there are, I'm no. Yeah, it seems that the buffers are in fairly weak and low concentrations, and the take up in most reef aquarias isn't huge, but just trying to maintain it within a range. I think that sort of 1200 to 1400 range seems to be sensible. I feel I have some quite strong views on the balance of alkalinity and calcium in a reef tank. I haven't really focused on it for years, so it's quite interesting that you brought it up. But it stirred something in me, Chris, when you said that.
I don't care about it at all. Like, I know that there's this like perfect balance or something, but if you've got a certain amount of alkalinity, you're meant to have a certain amount of calcium. I've literally never even looked into it, so I'm curious to hear your militant views on this.
Well, I think that just sums up the reef hobby in one go. It's like, for me, I think it's really important, and I had the most success when the two were balanced. When you're like, having had lots of successful tanks, like I haven't even looked at it.
Yeah.
There you go. So
that's reefing.
I think in the broadest possible sense, the higher your DKH, the higher your calcium is. When I was running my sort of my alkalinity fairly low in the SPS tank, sort of around 6, I was quite happy with my calcium being as low as sort of 380. And I'd actually start to worry if it got up to sort of 450, 460, which I think is probably where most people keep it. So I'd like to keep both low or both high, and I started to feel a little bit uncomfortable if one went up and the other went down, or vice versa. But that could just be me being neurotic, and thinking that it has some sort of great effect, but maybe it didn't in reality. But yeah, I always tried to keep those levels as balanced as I possibly could.
Okay, what about trace elements and ICPs? See, for a while there, it seemed like the next frontier, right? That people were going to do really regular ICPs and manually adjust all the trace elements according to that. And I think it's not something I've really delved into that much. One or two, like I think fluoride for a while I was dosing regularly, but I know, James, you were mixing up your own DIY traces at one point, right? So you obviously went into it quite heavily.
Yeah, I did. And I think that it's a balance, right? So I don't think the 4-foot SPS tank that I had mixed reef ever looked better than when I was like really in control of those trace elements and my dosing. And I was spending a hell of a lot of time and money, managing that, making my own buffer solutions, automated testing, regularly hands in the tank, testing most elements every day, correcting, regular ICPs. It's when I got the most color from the tank, but it's also when I spent the most time on it as well. So I don't know if there's a sort of false equivalence there, that actually was it the fact that I was dosing all of this trace, or was it the fact that I was actually just being very attentive and spending a couple of hours a day on it, every day, and had been for 6-12 months, I think that potentially it was the latter over the former. I dosed all sorts, bacteria, trace elements, amino acids. I fed corals if I felt like they needed it. But I'm not sure if I could really say categorically dosing this one element or dosing this one product created the stability that I needed for all of my coral to thrive and grow and be as colourful as possible. I think that I'd probably say to somebody, if I was forced to make to take a decision, that actually spending the time on the tank was the thing that made the biggest difference, and just being incredibly focused and attentive. Funnily enough, when my focus started to slip a little bit and I was continuing to dose a lot of different things, but my attention maybe wasn't there, that's when I started to have problems. And I think it probably signaled the start of the crash that I had, where I was overdosing. I think certain elements, I wasn't doing ICPs as regularly, I wasn't testing as regularly, I wasn't correcting my dosing solutions as regularly as I was. And I think that the start of that tank crash that I had, it wasn't overnight, but it was the top of the slippery slope, was probably due to the fact that I was just chucking so much stuff in, but I wasn't paying close enough attention to the tank. And I overdosed on certain things, created imbalance, instability as a result of that. And I think that, that's when I started getting cyano. And then you start to correct that, so you up your flow, and then all of a sudden you're moving all of your different parameters around. Light, turn the light down, turn the light up, move your flow pattern. Oh, I'll stop dosing that, I'll start dosing this, and you just create it. It sort of tail spins out of control, and you're not really focused or in a groove. And then I think it just was too much for it, and it started to give up, and I lost control.
I got the image in my head then of someone spinning plates, and you drop one, you try to correct that, and then the others start to fall, and it's like, and then after a while you can't kind of basically catch up, then you kind of lost control, and it's gotten away from you. I think, I can easily see that happening if you're doing a lot, and then you start to you carry on doing that, but you're not doing the sort of the monitoring, I guess, that goes along with that.
Yeah, and it's just the little things, blasting the rocks. I mean, I was blasting the rocks every 2 days, making sure that I wasn't getting a huge amount of detritus build up, and really paying attention to nutrients. It was just a lot of focus and attention on it. And when you're in a groove and it's all working, it's great. But I think the two things have to go hand in hand, and it's about what the reefer wants ultimately, and how they want to be in the hobby and manage the tank.
When I speak to people and they say they correcting their traces regularly, they do say their corals look better, or like the colors are better. I think that seems to be the primary benefit of going down that route.
Can I just be the scientist in this conversation and say, we're looking, it's one of those things, isn't it? A test. People are testing, they're putting in these chemicals. So you're out there with your drop every day. I'm putting 5 drops of this, 2 drops of that. And these things, I've been told, make these colour changes. So what's the thing you do then? You look for that colour change, don't you? So it's really hard to prove that. In reality, what people should be doing is probably having a camera set up the same time of day, the same light, taking a picture. And actually, that's the only way to prove it, isn't it? But I mean, fundamentally, it doesn't matter. Like, if people are getting the colours they want through their, whether they're being pushed that way through their mindset or whether it generally is, it doesn't matter. But yeah, I take slight, I struggle a little bit with the whole idea that I can see the difference, and it's one of those, well, you can see any difference if you want to look for it.
So the way that I managed it previously was, when I was setting it up, so I made my own dosing solutions, my own free part. And I used RO water, buffers, like powdered buffers for the main elements. And then I used individual trace elements. And I had this table which showed what trace elements could be mixed together and in what concentrations, whether it was KH, calcium, magnesium. And basically I did an ICP start of period, ICP end of period. And a bit like you'd work out your DKH dosing or your KH dosing, I worked at what my consumption was. So I put dosing solutions on. I think it might have been for 2 weeks. It might have been for a month. I can't remember, but I set it up and I put dosing solutions on with no trace elements in it whatsoever. And I tested at the beginning, and then I dosed the non-enriched dosing solutions with trace. And then I tested at the end, and I could work out what my consumption was. And then I would mix my trace elements into those individual buffering solutions based on my consumption. And then I did an ICP to test those elements, periodically, and then corrected accordingly. It needed a spreadsheet, calculate weighing scales, mixer. Making my solutions, I'd make a month's worth at a time, I think. It would take me an evening to do. It was like Breaking Bad in my kitchen.
What possessed you to go down that route? Like, I just can't imagine ever wanting to be that involved in it. I guess I think I just know I wouldn't be able to commit to that. But so I'm curious, like, what was your goal there?
I don't really know, Chris. It's a good question. What was my goal? I think I just wanted to really grow the coral that I had within the tank, as quickly and as beautifully as possible. It was like a challenge for me, and that was the challenge that I was like, personal challenge, that is, that I was like, really focused on. And, in the end, you start doubting these things because you probably don't get the result that you envisage or what have you, or you start thinking this is getting ridiculous now. It's intense. But yeah, I think it was just that challenge, really. I think I just really enjoyed the challenge and I wanted it to grow. And it was taking up a lot of time, but it was time that I was willing to invest and had the time to invest. So, why not?
To be fair, I would say you used it as a kind of a way to like open up discussions as well. Like whenever we'd go to shops and things, it was around that time we were doing a lot of reef tours, like going to all these various shops, and it was always the thing you'd use to chat to the like shop managers and people. Like, this is what I'm doing. How would you do it? It was like I was always very envious of that kind of opportunity to speak to these people. And I remember having conversations with various people like Christian at Signature Frags. And that level of detail you were chatting with was well beyond what I could have like comprehend at that point. But it was a real good way to get in and have a real targeted conversation. And you could see the shopkeepers then being like, "Oh, this is interesting." You're having this amazing dialogue. So I think it gave you like a gateway into chatting with some of these people who are they are the experts in our kind of field, aren't they? In effect, so I could see it as a good tool for you to open up a discussion with someone.
Oh, I mean, it wasn't the reason why I did it. I'll talk to anybody about anything, I don't. But yeah, no, you're right. I did. I spent a lot of time talking to a lot of shopkeepers, experienced hobbyists, and sort of, talking to them about what they're doing and telling them, sharing my learnings, what's happening. And yeah, they were always really interested and had an opinion, and gave me some really good pointers and helped shape it. But it was all for nothing in the end. Everything died.
I wonder if that's like, there's only two outcomes in reefing, isn't it? You end on a high and you shut down the tank early when it's in its prime, or it implodes in on itself. Do you do any ICP testing, Gareth?
So I went through a little period where I was doing them probably every 4 months, and I also do them whenever I've had an issue. I'll do one just to check there's no heavy metals, that kind of thing. But what I came to find was that I do, like, again, listen to various podcasts and things. It's all about having a baseline of what your tank is like. So I'd always do it when my tank's good. So I've got several, maybe 4 or 5 from various different points when my tank's looking good. And you see some of the results. So I use Fauna Marin usually for my tests. I like the company. I like what they do. And the feedback, there's always at least like 2 or 3 things that were like danger red and this is awful. You need to correct it now. It just, as more time went on, it's kind of pushed me towards the idea that I'm not sure it actually means or does anything for me. So I've done a little bit of dosing things to bring them back into balance, but nothing like James did and nothing like the dropper bottle style. But I've used it to spot patterns and trends. But I just think doing the core things works for me. So again, I use Fauna Marin trace elements for my solution. I'm kind of like, if I trust them, I trust that if I'm putting it in my tank, there's enough of it. And there's the whole idea, isn't that some things have a really short half-life, whether the coral's taking them up, whether the bacteria's taking them up, whether they're precipitating out, it doesn't really matter. I'm dosing 24 times a day. So that stuff is in there. And then, I just got to this point with ICPs where it's quite an expensive thing to do as a regular thing. And every time I look at it, I'm like, I'm a bit confused what I've actually got information-wise. So I'm kind of the opinion that ICPs are a really good tool for spotting like dangers. So like I've got lead in my tank, something like that. My magnets are blown out, in which case I can go look through them. But even then, if you got something wrong with your tank, an ICP doesn't always tell you it. But so that's where I've come down to with ICPs. I think they're a useful tool, but I won't be using them as a regular checking in on things. It's going to be more of an emergency. Have I had something disastrous happen that I've not noticed?
Yeah, I think I'm similar. I rarely do them. I mainly do them if something's wrong. And with one exception, they've never been that helpful. So I've never been able to act on anything really, apart from maybe one instance where I had some metals and really high iodine, and I just did a massive water change. But I've never really. I know, like a bit like you said, I don't know what to do with the information. Sometimes it's an easy fix, like it says low strontium or something, and so you dose a bit more. But otherwise, I tend to just ignore all the stuff that's like the metals that I've never heard of at a low. I just kind of think, well, we don't know if this actually does anything anyway, so I'm not going to bother with it.
Definitely, and it's on that point as well. You reminded me mention of iodine. My tank always runs high with iodine. I suspect it's because I feed quite a lot of shellfish and mussels for the copper band, but it's always high. And everyone's like, "Oh, iodine's like an instant way to wipe out your tank." I don't think I've ever had an ICP back where it's not in the red, and that's knowing then that I think iodine again is another fairly unstable element. So it's been in the post for 5 days to Germany, and it still reads dangerously high. So is it dangerous? I don't know. I'm sure there is a level of danger to it, but if I'm flashing red every time, it makes me think maybe these things aren't quite as clear cut as they make it out to be. So I've lost the fact. I was really like into ICPs as an idea, but as time's gone on, I don't see the value, if I'm honest.
Okay, let's close it out then by talking about nutrients. So what are your views on nitrates and phosphates when it comes to stability? How much do you worry about them fluctuating?
Yeah, I try to keep mine stable, but not in a crazy way. So I like, and again, I was thinking about this week with this coming up. I like my nitrates to be between 20 and 30, and then within a factor of 100 smaller for phosphate. So if I have 10 in my nitrates, I want 0.1 for my phosphates. Have I seen much difference? I think my nitrates and phosphates are about as high as they've been at the moment. So they're roughly 30 and 0.3. And I'm starting to see algae growing at a rate faster than my algae eaters are keeping up with. So it's the first time I think I've actually ever seen an impact. I've never had low. Well, actually, I lie. I have had low. I'll talk about it in a minute. But high-wise, it's the first time I've seen an impact. And even then, I've got so many micro creatures that I suspect they'll just start picking up in numbers and start eating it. So we'll get that natural balance. But it reminded myself then, I have once run a tank which was massively out of balance, which is my very first tank. And I think, can you remember, James, was it like phosphate was like 0.8 and there was no nitrates or something like that? Can't remember. You came over and tested it. It was in my very first few weeks of doing it.
I do. I don't test nutrients now because of the style of the tank, but I do think that the better tanks generally have well balanced nutrients, whatever that means, but where they're in proportions where it makes sense. If you've got one low, one high, one low, then it's probably worth correcting it in order to create more stability. I've seen beautiful tanks that run on really high nutrients, and I've seen beautiful tanks that run on really low nutrients. I do think that, again, this might be something that I got hung up on. You guys might not have looked at, but again, I think that there's a relationship between your PAR and the amount of light that you put into the tank and the level that you run your nutrients. And I think finding that balance for the coral or the livestock that you're keeping is really important. I'm not necessarily saying that low nutrients, high light is the only way to go for like an SPS tank. You can have high light and high nutrients. But I think if you really want to elevate the health of the coral, you do have to have a viewpoint on that and try and stick to it. You know, am I going to run low par, high nutrients, for example, in a softy LPS tank? But with an SPS tank, I think you've got different options in terms of what you want to try and get out of your coral.
I thought you were going to say you ran high par, high nutrients because the coral were like getting more light, you're driving the system faster, higher energy, so it needs more fuel. But I think you were going to say the opposite.
I ran the tank high energy, so high light, really high flow, loads of nutrient export, like as much as I could possibly get through lots of different means, carbon dosing, refugium. But then I was also really high input as well. So I was feeding lots, but I was also dosing sources of nitrate and ammonia and trying to really nail those at low levels. So it was like this mixture of like really high energy, high input, but also really high output. And I was almost trying to strip as much of the nutrients as I could out of the water, almost at 0-0, and then redose that peg it to a level where I was really comfortable. And that was generally nitrate under 5, but over 1, and phosphate 0.01 to 0.05, and tried to keep it within that level.
That's what they do in freshwater world, isn't it? They try to basically strip out all the nutrients and dose that back in. So it's like it's giving you that level of control, I think, which really lets you peg a certain number. I think I'm more similar to Gareth. It fluctuates basically. I normally have on all of my tanks, every tank I've ever had, I've had the issue that nitrates, if I don't do anything about it, they'll go to 0. And I think that's because I've got this sintered glass media, which I've had since day one. They say that there are these anaerobic zones inside which allow certain bacteria to denitrification? So they basically turn the nitrates into nitrogen gas. And so you're actually getting rid of the nitrates. And whether or not that is happening, I don't know, but that's the only explanation I have. But I don't want to you might think, well, we'll just get rid of the media, but it's so old now. I've had it my whole reefing career that I'm I don't want to give it up because I've seeded every tank with it. It allows me to, in an emergency, take a bag out, stick it in a bucket, and put a fish in there if I need to, if I've had to take a fish out or something. It's so useful to have, but I don't want to get rid of it. But it means I've always had to dose something. So yeah, I'm dosing ammonia and urea and stuff at the moment on the SPS tank, but. Yeah, otherwise, and then phosphates, like most reefers, generally it's always higher than I'd like it, but yeah, I don't care about it too much. On the SPS cube, I've made it go too low, I think, and that's what caused the dinos, because I'm doing GFO on that tank, which I've never really done before. I've got it in a reactor, because what I consider one of the best SPS cubers ever, Abe from Coral Euphoria, he did a really great video where he was like, are we growing better corals today than we were 10, 20 years ago? And he basically trawled through all of these, I think from Reef Central, all of the tanks of the months. And he was like, if you look at all of these, they're doing different methods. Some of them are doing, kind of classic ball in, or some of them are doing what's the super low nutrient one? You mentioned it a minute ago. Zeovit, yeah. He was like, no matter what you do, if you look at all of these tanks, no matter what they're doing, they're keeping the basics the same. And a lot of them were running GFO and keeping phosphate low, and that's what he does. And he basically runs 0 phosphate all the time and runs GFO all the time, and he has some of the best acropora I think anyone's ever grown. So that's kind of why I went for that approach on this tank. Okay, so you kind of both mentioned a few times there different approaches. So I'd be curious to know what are you guys using at the moment to keep your tank stable, essentially, to dose your main chemical parameters?
I'm using a little bit of All-for-Reef, and that's it. Got a very simple setup. And actually, having just gone through this last hour or 2 hours of therapy with you guys, I'm not sure this is right for me. It's interesting. But yeah, so I'm just dosing a little bit of All-for-Reef to sort of keep things within the very broad parameters that I'm trying to keep.
I think for All-for-Reef is I always think of it as a calcium reactor in a bottle, because and I guess the reason why I wanted to run through them was like, let's say, I think we've got quite a lot of new reefers listening to this podcast, so it'd be useful to just give people, here are the different options. And I think All-for-Reef, it's kind of like a calcium reactor in a bottle. It doses everything in one solution. It's calcium formate based, which means that it requires bacteria to metabolize it essentially and break it down into alkalinity and calcium. And so it has this kind of like slow release effect. So you don't see that's one of the biggest drawbacks of it to me as someone who tests alkalinity every hour with an automated checker, is that you can't see the impact straight away. I think it takes like 6 to 12 hours or something to see it. But I think it's one of the simplest and easiest ways to dose. And it's the way I started dosing. I just bought a single DD-P1 doser and a bottle of All-for-Reef, and that did me really well for a year or so. And it's what I recommend to all new hobbyists. Would you agree?
I'd say so. It's a nice, simple solution, isn't it? It's a funny one in that as your tank consumes, you'll probably see various elements decrease in different rates, and you might end up topping up. So I've heard quite a few people will be in that dose All-for-Reef and calcium, and then you get into this funny area where you're kind of doing this hybrid method. You're probably better adjusting. I think when you hit that kind of point, that's probably where personally I think you should probably looking at a 2-part method or changing your method. So for me, that's the clue that your tank's gone through this period of like starting out. You've probably learnt enough to then be able to dose more effectively. You know what you're looking for. You can test. And for me, it's like the entry level dosing that'll get you through to your 2-part. And I don't think you even need to do 2-part, but it kind of you hit a point where you might as well do 2-part because it's cheaper if you do it yourself than dosing All-for-Reef.
I prefer 2-part. I know I'm using All-for-Reef and I'm completely happy with it, but I think 2-part's probably a good starting point. It just gets you into testing 2 different parameters and adjusting dosing as well, and it's pretty straightforward. It's just a bit more expensive, isn't it? You've got to buy an extra dosing pump, a different container. I don't see why you wouldn't just go for 2-part if All-for-Reef wasn't right for you. I think either of those 2 would be perfect for somebody just setting up.
I would say most reefers seem to be using a 2-part, and the options are either something commercial, like, you mentioned Fauna Marin, or, I'm using Reef's Elements, for example. But I think we've all dabbled with making our own as well. So, Gareth, you completely DIY your 2-part, or I guess it's technically 3-part, isn't it?
Yeah, so I use the balling tight method, which is effectively the balling light from Fauna Marin. So you buy your own food grade ingredients for that. So I buy calcium chloride dihydrate flakes, sodium bicarbonate, I think I use, and then magnesium sulfate hexahydrate, which all sounds pretty scientific. So I think I bought like kilos of this stuff, and I did that about 2 years ago, and I'm still using it, and that cost me about £60 in the raw materials. You then need to add your trace to it. So I use the Fauna Marin trace because that's what the method's based on. It's effectively a rip-off of the Fauna Marin technique. So you stick their traces in, and that was probably about the same cost as the bulk ingredients. So if you put all those together, I probably put in about 120 quid, and that was 2 years ago, and I've still got, or best guess, a year's worth of the bulk ingredients and probably 2 years worth of the trace. So over that period of time, you're talking about like the order of 30 to 50 quid, depending on the size of your tank. So, I mean, for me, that's where your All-for-Reef probably then starts to fall down a bit. Yeah, you can buy it in powder and it's cheaper, but the real saving, if you want to really save money, if that's your thing, DIY bulk ingredients is the way to do it. It's so much cheaper. The downside to it, though, is that you are making it up yourself, so you have to be really militant about how you do it. So like a few grams here, you don't just like throw a bit in here, throw a bit there. So all my containers have the right levels marked out for different liquid levels. I use scales that are scientific level scales, which you can buy easily in the cheap and that kind of thing. But you have to be really like thorough with your process. Same with the trace. You don't say, it's about 15 mil. You put in exactly the right amount. And then even then, I still try and mix half of my new solutions with half of what's in the dosing container. So then it's a gradual change.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. Rather than it completely run out, you mix the two, and then when you put your new solution in, there's been a halfway in between. So there's ways around it. And I mean, like, if anyone is interested, I'm happy to chat to you about it. So just get in touch on Ultimate Reef or something. But it sounds really complicated. It looks complicated, but once you've done it once, if you set it up right, it is absolutely like the way to do it for me. And like I say, so much cheaper when you compare it to buying commercial two parts. And that's the main issue, is when you buy a commercial two part, generally it's pre-made, so you're actually paying for the shipping of the liquid, which is just RO. It's nothing special or anything. So if you're going to do it your own, like buying the powder for All-for-Reef is a good way of doing it. Like, I really rate Tropic Marin for doing that. There's no one else that's selling their powders really that I know of that's like that. There probably is, but I really rate them for that. That's a real saving for the customer. But yeah, that'd be my advice. That'd be my way to do it.
Yeah, I went down that route for a bit on my old mixed reef. So I was, again, because I was trying to I was fanatic about pH, and I was trying to chase this dragon of stable pH, stable alkalinity. I think I had 9 dosing heads. So I was dosing sodium hydroxide at night, which is really high pH. It melts a hole in your hand if you get it on your hand, basically. It turns your hands into soap. And then I was dosing sodium bicarbonate in the day as like a second alkalinity buffer, because that one doesn't affect pH at all. I mean, actually, it lowers it a little bit, but it comes back up. So that was like stopping pH go too high in the day when the corals are already kind of buffering pH themselves. Then I was dosing calcium separately, magnesium separately, and then I had 2 bottles of trace. So I was doing the Tropic Marine A and K bottle. And that did work. It was a bit of a juggling act, and something I was never satisfied about it was the fact that I was just going on like very rough estimates for the traces. And my idea going into it was that I'll do a monthly ICP and I can up or lower those traces, but I just wasn't religious enough to do that. And I had the feeling, again, I can't really say for sure, but I had the feeling that the colors on the coral weren't as good as when I was just doing like a commercial 2-part. And I would probably put that down to the traces not being good enough. Something else I was also doing, which is another way to approach stability, is kalkwasser.
I think if you were to ask me to design the perfect dosing system, it would involve kalkwasser. Just dosing on a peri pump, to your level of your evaporation. I mean, you start to put that in all the systems that we've described earlier, and you start getting very complicated fish tanks, right? It's like even that, just working out what your daily evaporation is and then putting it on a peri pump so that it's continuously dripping and monitoring that, But when you got high, DKH and calcium consumption, you can dose your calc to your evaporation. It still won't touch the sides, but you do get that pH boost, particularly during the evening. I think it's sort of magic as well. I noticed that coralline grew much quicker. Again, I don't know if it's pH or if there's something else wonderful in that powder that does it, but the tank just felt happier. And why wouldn't you do it? If you've got the consumption and you've got the evaporation, you might as well just put calc in rather than standard RO.
I remember you saying that to me, James. You were like, you're dosing liters of RO into your tank every day. Why not make it work for you? Like, just add in, 10 grams of this little cheap, one of the cheapest ways to dose as well. It's super, super cheap. Just add that to your use that instead of just dosing in plain RO, and it'll actually meet a huge amount of your demand.
Yeah.
Now I'm wondering, like, why am I not doing
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I've convinced myself.
I was going to say, it's worth saying for the newbie kind of listeners, you're not actually talking about replacing your RO reserve with calc. You're talking about dosing calc, because obviously you have the risk, as I've had last week, where my reservoir, my sensor got water ingress and it dumped 40 litres of RO into my tank.
Oh, really?
If that had been 40 litres of calc, I think I'd have seen a very different outcome. I think it was important that you put it on a peri pump, like James says, but this is me coming from a non-calc person. I'd like to calc, but I don't have the evaporation. I've got a glass lid. Everything's sealed as best it can be to keep my wife happy in terms of damp and things. So I only have a couple of litres of evaporation a day, so it's probably not quite worth it, but yeah, something I'd like to do.
You've got to keep your RO reservoir on. So even though you're dosing to your evaporation, you still need an ATO and you still need your reservoir full of RO and you still need a pump pumping it in if it drops below the sensor. Otherwise, you're gonna cause all sorts of issues.
Yeah, so maybe for the newbie reefers, so kalkwasser, it's basically calcium hydroxide, right? Which is a powder that you just mix in with the water. And the biggest drawback of it is that you can only add like a very small amount to a certain amount of water before it won't mix in essentially. So you can only add, I think it's 1.6 grams per liter, something like that. So you basically can't dissolve that much of it into water. So it's a very weak solution. So that means you actually have to have quite a big container of it to dose it regularly, and you have to dose it. Generally, the best way to dose it is on a peristaltic pump, so it's dripping it in. I don't know, one drop every couple of seconds or something, or every couple of minutes. So it is good. It's really, really cheap, and I think historically it was like the first way that people were addressing dosing, and it can get you very far. And the old school method was to just put it in your ATO, right, and just let that top it off. But then you have spikes in pH, spikes in alkalinity and stuff. So the best way is to have it in addition to your RO.
They'll absolutely ruin your pump as well.
Yeah,
because it'll be sat in the slurry at the bottom.
Some people do that, right? To get around that issue, they have like a much smaller volume of water and they dump loads and loads of powder into that, and they have a pump in there that's just continually mixing, like a wave maker, continually mixing it. And it looks like milk, there's that much powder in there, and they dose that in, and they essentially use the tank as like the dilution, so it then dissolves with the tank water, and that's called slurry dosing. People who do it seem to have a lot of success, but it seems to be super controversial, and I think that's because on one hand there's like, I guess, safety risks. It could nuke your tank. I think people aren't sure like whether the pump that you're using to mix the solution, like, can that really withstand that kind of concentration. But I have seen people who do it. They're on like year 3 of the same jet bow pump is still going. So that is an option, but I think that's definitely like next level experimental approach.
You can buy reactors as well that mix outside of your tank, so you can keep higher levels of concentration, and it's keeping the particles in suspension and gives you a higher concentration. They're just really difficult to find in the UK. Well,
they're really expensive.
Mechanical ones are, and they're very expensive. I mean, I just had a 25-litre drum of RO water next to the tank, and I dosed the maximum. I put the maximum amount of kalkwasser that I possibly could have in the container, and just kept that topped up. I had to do it about once a week, I think, maybe once every 4 or 5 days, something like that. And you would still get solution, the kalkwasser falling out of suspension. But when I noticed it and I walked past, I just picked it up and gave it a shake.
That was my biggest issue with it, is that it would run out and I wasn't good enough at like replacing it. Because it needed to do it every week. That was the drawback for me. So if I was to do it again, I'd want like a massive vat of it that I just don't have to touch for weeks on end. And it's messy and like, I don't know. It is good, but it was definitely a faff. So maybe I've talked myself out of it again now.
Myself into it. I think I'm going to get rid of all the soft coral and start putting some acropora in this tank.
Yes, let's do
it. Yeah. Maybe just as a quick fire then. So if you could peg one parameter, let's say you have a magic button that you can press, and your tank will just, for that one parameter, it will just stay stable forever. What parameter would you pick?
Well, I'm going to go off piece for this one. I'm going to say my time. I think that's the one parameter that I'd keep the same. We were talking today, weren't we, about summer tanks? I think all three of us have said it. I wish I could keep my time the same, because I know what I like to do, and I like doing all these various different things. I think if I can put in the same amount of time every week, I'll get much better results. I think I'm the stability factor in my tank personally.
That's a very James answer, completely left field.
That's it. Give us a science answer, James.
It's a good one. I think I think I'm going to say salinity. It's a bit boring, but it's important. And as we spoke about, you've got the alkalinity, calcium balance. If you peg one, then do you not peg the other? I'm going to go salinity.
Fair enough. I'm unsurprisingly, mine would be pH. So, and then most overrated parameter?
I need a minute to think about that one.
Manganese.
Yeah, that's a cop-out because you could just say barium or chromium.
Yeah, copper.
Yeah.
That's Oh, I should say magnesium, shouldn't I? Since I never actually did anything with it. So for me, magnesium.
I would say alkalinity.
I'm not sure about that.
So I guess my justification for that is that I've never been that good at keeping it stable, and it's not held me back as a reefer. So, even when it's swung massively because I've had a pump overdose or I've let it drop really, really low because something's run out. My lagoon tank, I tested it the other day and alkalinity was 4 and everything looks great still. So I don't know. I think it's even with massive swings, I've not seen a massive difference. I've never seen burnt tips or anything. And yeah, I would say alkalinity is overrated, or the idea that you need to have super stable alkalinity, I think is overrated. Great. Okay, well, the final thing then is to announce the winner of the giveaway, which has been running on for several weeks now. So to sort of celebrate the launch of the podcast and to drum up interest in the podcast, we are giving away a £50 gift card for Prestige Reef to buy some corals with. What I've done is, if you've commented on any post on Facebook, Instagram, I've put all those names into a random name generator. And the name that was picked was Nathan Trevorway, I think is how you pronounce it, Trevorway. It rhymes with giveaway, so that's how I'm trying to remember it. But Nathan, congratulations. If you either reach out to me or I'll try and contact you on Facebook or Instagram, and I'll send you a link to that gift card that you can use, and have fun buying some coral.
Well done.
So I think that's everything which we wanted to talk about with this topic. I think we've gone... we don't have to talk about stability now for a long time. I think we've covered a lot there. Any final thoughts, comments with you guys?
No, it was fun. I enjoyed that as a conversation. It's one of those topics that doesn't sound the most exciting, but actually when you get into it, there's a lot to it, isn't there? There's more to discuss than you might first think.
So we have to think about what the next episode would be on. I think we're almost ready for a guest. So we wanted to get a few episodes under our belt to, work out kind of the kinks and stuff like that. But I think we're ready now for a guest. So if any listeners have any suggestions on people that they'd like to hear from, the idea of this podcast was to be a platform for the UK reefing scene. So I'd really like to sort of have a UK guest on. If you have any suggestions, then let us know. Otherwise, we've got a few ideas ourselves. Do give us a follow on Instagram. Tell your friends about us. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.
You've been listening to Reefing Radio. Subscribe, share, and stay salty. Reefing Radio, over and out.